In February 1959, 9 experienced hikers set up camp in the remote Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. They were young, skilled, and well prepared for winter conditions. But sometime during the night, something happened. Investigators later discovered their tent torn open from the inside. The hikers had fled into the freezing wilderness wearing little more than socks and thin clothing. Some were found miles away. Several had died from exposure. Others had severe injuries that investigators struggled to explain. More than 60 years later, the question remains: what forced 9 experienced hikers to abandon their shelter and run into the frozen darkness? This is the Dyatlov Pass incident. The expedition begins. The expedition began in January 1959. A group of 10 hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute planned a challenging winter trek through the northern Ural Mountains. The expedition leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student with significant experience in backcountry hiking. The goal of the trip was to reach a remote mountain known as a Torten. The route was considered difficult, especially in winter conditions, but the group was well qualified. Most of the hikers were students or graduates in engineering fields. They had experience with cold weather expeditions and had completed similar trips before. Early in the journey, one member of the group turned back due to illness. That decision would save his life. The remaining 9 continued into the mountains. The final camp. On February 1st, the hikers set up their final known campsite. They pitched their tent on the eastern slope of a mountain called Kalat Shakal, which translates roughly to Dead Mountain. The location was exposed to strong winds and extreme temperatures. Investigators later questioned why the group chose that particular campsite instead of moving slightly lower where the terrain offered more protection. But experienced hikers often choose higher ground to avoid avalanche risk and maintain visibility. The group prepared dinner. They wrote in their journals. They organized their equipment. Everything appeared normal. At some point during the night, something changed. The abandoned tent. When search teams eventually located the campsite weeks later, the scene was disturbing. The tent had been sliced open from the inside. The hikers' boots and heavy winter clothing were still inside. Food supplies remained untouched. The group had left the tent abruptly. Footprints in the snow showed that the hikers had walked, not run, down the slope, but they had done so without proper clothing. Outside temperatures that night were estimated to be around -25 to -30 degrees Celsius. In those conditions, survival without proper protection would be extremely difficult. The footprints eventually disappeared into the forest below. The first discoveries. Rescue teams followed the trail into a wooded area about a kilometer away. There they found the remains of a small fire. 2 members of the group were discovered near the tree line. Both had died from hypothermia. Higher up the slope, 3 more bodies were found. These hikers appeared to have been attempting to return to the tent. They also died from exposure. At this point, 5 members of the group had been located, but 4 were still missing. The remaining 4. 2 months later, the remaining hikers were found beneath the snow in a nearby ravine. Their injuries raised new questions. One hiker had severe chest trauma. Another had a fractured skull. One woman was missing her tongue. Investigators reported that some injuries resembled those caused by powerful force, similar to what might occur in a car accident. Yet there were no signs of external attack, no evidence of other footprints, no indication that another group had been present. These findings complicated the investigation. Early theories. Soviet investigators struggled to explain the events. Several possibilities were considered: avalanche, wildlife attack, conflict within the group, military testing, but each theory had weaknesses. There were no clear avalanche indicators at the campsite. Animal tracks were not present, and the hikers appeared to leave the tent calmly rather than in panic. Eventually, the official Soviet investigation concluded that the hikers had died due to what it described as an unknown compelling force. The case was closed. Modern explanations. Over the decades, many theories have been proposed. Some researchers believe a small slab avalanche may have forced the group to evacuate the tent. Others suggest that unusual wind patterns may have created infrasound, low-frequency vibrations that can cause intense feelings of fear or disorientation. In 2020, Russian authorities reopened the investigation and concluded that an avalanche was the most likely explanation. Computer modeling suggested that snow movement could have caused injuries similar to those documented. But debate continues. Some investigators argue that the terrain does not fully support the avalanche theory. Others believe multiple factors may have been involved. Why the mystery endures? The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most famous unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. Part of the reason is the combination of strange details: the torn tent, the missing clothing, the unusual injuries, and the lack of a clear, universally accepted explanation. The remote environment and harsh weather conditions made the investigation extremely difficult. Even today, the mountains where the hikers died remain largely unchanged, silent, cold, and unforgiving. More than 60 years later, the exact sequence of events that night remains uncertain. 9 experienced hikers entered the mountains. Only one returned. Whether the cause was avalanche, environmental factors, or something still misunderstood, the Dyatlov Pass incident continues to challenge investigators and historians. This is the Unsolved Archive. Subscribe for documented cases that still raise questions.